There I was, watching my 8-year-old niece Emma building sandcastles with her friends, when this HOA president comes charging down my dock like a rabid Karen on steroids. Brenda Whitmore, think your worst nightmare neighbor times 10, starts screaming at these innocent kids to get off this lake right now. The metallic clang of her clipboard smashing against my dock posts, mixed with her screeching voice and the thick smell of summer algae, created the perfect storm of rage in my chest. But here's what she didn't know. I'd been preparing for this exact moment for 3 years. When I calmly said, "Ma'am, this is actually my private land," her face went whiter than her bleached hair. What would you do if some power-hungry HOA witch tried to kick your family off your own property? Drop a comment if you've ever wanted to absolutely destroy an HOA Karen, and tell me what state you're watching from. By the end of this story, Brenda would be packing her bags and fleeing the neighborhood in complete humiliation. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. My name's Jake Brennan, 42 years old, retired Army logistics officer who now works as a freelance consultant. 3 years ago, I inherited this gorgeous lakefront cabin from my grandfather in Pine Ridge Estates, Missouri, a little slice of heaven that's been in our family since 1987, way before any HOA even existed. Here's the thing about this place. It's not just property to me. After my divorce last year, this cabin became my sanctuary. Every summer, my 8-year-old niece Emma comes to stay for 6 weeks while her dad, my brother, is deployed overseas. The sound of her giggling as she jumps off the dock, the splash of cool water on hot Missouri afternoons, the smell of sunscreen mixed with barbecue smoke from neighboring grills. This place is where our family heals. But then there's Brenda Whitmore. Picture a 54-year-old woman who looks like she stepped out of a How to Be a Karen instruction manual. Bleached blonde hair always in that aggressive bob cut, oversized sunglasses permanently perched on her head, and a voice that could shatter glass from 3 counties away. She's been HOA president for 8 years running, unopposed, because apparently nobody else wanted to deal with her drama. Brenda used to be a bank loan officer before she was forced into early retirement for what they diplomatically called customer relations issues. Now she lives in an $800,000 McMansion and spends her days as president of 3 different women's groups, which basically means she's professionally qualified to make everyone else's life miserable. From day one, she's had it out for me. Year 1. Complained about my unsightly fishing boat, a perfectly maintained 1970s bass boat that my grandfather and I restored together. Year 2. Demanded I remove the hand-built dock that's been here since 1989, claiming it was an eyesore. Year 3. She started filing weekly violation notices for everything from my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall to hanging Christmas lights in December. The crunch of her high heels on my gravel driveway became the soundtrack of dread. Her overpowering perfume mixed with cigarette smoke would hit you like a wall before you even saw her coming. But here's what really got under my skin. She consistently targeted anyone who was different. Single guys, veterans, anyone who didn't fit her cookie-cutter suburban fantasy. This summer, when Emma arrived with 3 school friends for their annual lake weekend, Brenda completely lost it. These kids were doing what kids do: kayaking, swimming, building sandcastles, having actual fun, normal lake activities that have been happening here for decades. But Friday evening, she storms over with her trusty clipboard and a face full of righteous fury. "Mr. Brennan," she screeched, waving some papers that looked official but probably came from her home printer, "you're in violation of guest policies and creating an overcrowding situation." I'm standing there thinking, lady, there are 4 kids and 2 kayaks. This isn't exactly Mardi Gras. "These children need to leave immediately," she continued, "and if they don't, I'm calling the police for trespassing." That's when Emma tugged on my shirt and whispered, "Uncle Jake, why is that lady so mean?" Something shifted in me right then. This wasn't just about property violations or neighborhood politics anymore. This was about protecting my family from a bully who'd been operating unchecked for way too long. I looked down at Emma's worried little face, then back at Brenda's smug expression, and made a decision that would change everything. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about jurisdiction." Brenda just laughed. "Jurisdiction? Mr. Brennan, I am the jurisdiction around here." Oh, Brenda, if only you knew what I knew. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of beautiful weather that makes you grateful to live on a lake. Emma and her friends were already planning their day. More swimming, maybe some fishing, definitely s'mores around the fire pit later. the smell of bacon drifting from neighboring cabins mixed with the fresh morning breeze off the water, creating that perfect summer vacation atmosphere. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of multiple car doors slamming in my driveway like some kind of suburban SWAT team deployment. Brenda was back, and this time she'd brought her flying monkeys. 3 HOA board members trudged behind her like reluctant soldiers, following a deranged general into battle they knew they couldn't win. She was clutching a thick folder and wearing what I can only describe as her intimidation outfit, a power blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. "Mr. Brennan," she announced, marching onto my property with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. "I'm here with the Emergency Response Committee to address yesterday's safety violations." Emergency Response Committee? For 4 kids with pool noodles and a rubber duck? "All guests must vacate the premises immediately," she continued, pulling out what looked like an official document but had clearly been printed on her home computer about 10 minutes ago. "You're in violation of HOA Emergency Safety Regulation 47C, which restricts dock usage during high traffic periods." I glanced at the lake. 2 fishing boats and a pontoon moving slower than my grandfather used to walk. Real maritime crisis there, Admiral Brenda. But here's where 3 years of military logistics training kicked in. See, after yesterday's confrontation, I'd spent my evening doing something Brenda clearly hadn't expected: actual homework. I'd learned a long time ago that when dealing with bullies, you better know the rules better than they do. "That's fascinating," I said, pulling out my phone with the casual confidence of someone holding 4 aces. "When exactly was that regulation passed? Because I'd love to see the meeting minutes." The board members started shifting like kids caught cheating on a test. Tom, who lives 3 houses down and actually seems like a decent guy, was suddenly fascinated by his own shoes. It's a standing safety protocol," Brenda stammered, her usual commanding voice developing a slight crack. That's when I remembered something my old army buddy Marcus had told me when I first started dealing with Brenda's harassment. He's a lawyer now, and he'd mentioned that Missouri is what they call a one-party consent state for recording. Basically, if you're part of a conversation, you can record it without telling anyone else, especially on your own property. "Well, here's the thing, Brenda," I said, holding up my phone where the recording app was clearly visible. "I've been documenting all our interactions for the past 6 months. You know, for my own protection against false accusations." Her face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a sauna. "You can't record me without my permission. That's illegal surveillance." "Actually," I replied, loud enough for all the board members to hear clearly, "Missouri law only requires one party's consent for recording conversations. Since I'm giving myself permission on my own property, we're completely legal here." And I'd spent an hour researching this exact scenario after Marcus mentioned it, and let me tell you, knowing your state's recording laws is like having a superpower when dealing with people who lie about what they said. Tom cleared his throat like he was trying to swallow a golf ball. "Brenda, maybe we should discuss this more privately with the full board." "No," she snapped, her professional facade cracking like cheap paint in the summer heat. "This man is threatening our entire community with his surveillance state tactics." I almost burst out laughing. Here she was, standing uninvited on my driveway, screaming at my family, and somehow I was the threatening one. That's when I noticed something beautiful happening around us. The Johnson family from across the cove had stopped their morning jog and were openly staring. The elderly Kowalski couple next door was pretending to water plants that were clearly already soaked, hanging on every word. Mrs. Olivia from 2 houses down was walking her dog in slow motion, like she was afraid she might miss something good. Brenda was having her public meltdown in front of half the neighborhood, and she was too blinded by rage to realize she was destroying her own credibility in real time. "You think you can intimidate the HOA with your little spy cameras?" she shrieked, waving her arms like one of those inflatable tube dancers at car dealerships. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to intimidate anyone," I said, keeping my voice level and reasonable for our growing audience. "I'm just protecting myself and my family from harassment. Like yesterday when you claimed 4 children playing quietly constituted an overcrowding emergency." I gestured toward the water, where Emma and her friends were now sitting on the dock with their feet dangling in the water, sharing a bag of chips and watching the adults argue like it was better than Saturday morning cartoons. "That," I said directly to the board members, "is your community emergency." The sound of gravel crunching under shifting feet told me the board was getting more uncomfortable by the second. Perfect. The next week started quietly enough. Emma and her friends had settled into their perfect lake routine: morning swims, afternoon kayaking, evening campfires with more marshmallows than any human should consume. The sweet smell of wood smoke and the sound of their giggles drifting across the water at sunset made me think maybe Brenda had finally gotten the message. I should have known better. Tuesday morning, I'm making coffee when I hear the mail truck pull up. Along with the usual bills and junk mail, there's a certified letter from the county zoning office. My stomach dropped faster than a lead fishing weight. "Dear Mr. Brennan," it read, "we have received a formal complaint regarding an allegedly unpermitted structure on your property at 247 Lakeshore Drive. Specifically, a dock construction that may violate current environmental protection standards and pose safety hazards to the community waterway." Brenda had gone nuclear. She'd actually called the county on me. But here's the thing about trying to intimidate a former Army logistics officer. We're really, really good at paperwork. I drove straight to the county office, armed with every document my grandfather had ever saved. Permits, environmental impact studies, the works. Turns out, when you keep everything in military-grade filing systems for 36 years, bureaucrats get pretty impressed. The inspector who reviewed my case was a guy named Rodriguez, maybe 55, with the kind of weathered hands that told you he'd built more than a few things in his lifetime. When he saw my stack of perfectly organized documents, he actually smiled. "Haven't seen paperwork this clean since I got out of the Marines," he chuckled. "Your grandfather filed everything correctly in 1989. Doc's completely legal." Then Rodriguez leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples like he had a headache. "Can I ask you something off the record? You know a woman named Brenda Whitmore?" "Unfortunately. She's filed 47 complaints this year, 47, most of them against the same 5 or 6 people." He pulled out a thick folder. Unpermitted sheds that were actually permitted, dangerous trees that were perfectly healthy, septic systems that were somehow contaminating areas 3 miles away. We've started charging her $50 per complaint just to slow her down. My brain started connecting dots faster than a supercomputer. She's been systematically harassing multiple residents? "Can't say that officially," Rodriguez replied. "But between you and me, lady's got issues, and she seems to have a particular problem with veterans and single fathers." Driving home, I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. Brenda was running a one-woman harassment campaign against anyone who didn't fit her perfect suburban fantasy. That evening, I decided to test a theory. I fired up the grill, bought way too much food, and sent a text to every neighbor whose phone number I had. "Impromptu barbecue tonight, bring whatever you want to drink." The response was incredible. By 6 o'clock, my backyard looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. The Johnsons brought their famous potato salad. The Kowalskis showed up with enough Polish sausage to feed a small army. Mrs. Olivia brought homemade egg rolls that disappeared faster than free concert tickets. As the evening progressed and the beer loosened tongues, the stories started flowing like water through a broken dam. Tom, the board member who'd looked so uncomfortable during Brenda's morning raid, pulled me aside near the fire pit. The orange flames cast dancing shadows across his worried face as he spoke quietly. "Jake, I owe you an apology. I never wanted to be part of that circus the other day." "No worries, man. Not your fault your HOA president's lost her mind." Tom looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "It's worse than you know. She tried to force me to remove my American flag last month. Said it was too large for residential display and violated some made-up aesthetic guideline." My jaw dropped. "She went after your flag?" "Gets better. When I told her to pound sand, she filed a complaint with the city claiming my flagpole was a safety hazard because it might fall on a passing jogger." Tom's laugh held no humor. "The thing's been up for 12 years. Never moved an inch." Mrs. Olivia overheard and joined our conversation, her usually cheerful demeanor turning serious. "She made us repaint our entire house last year. Said the color was not consistent with community standards. Cost us $8,000. "What color was it?" I asked. "Pale yellow. Same shade as 3 other houses in the neighborhood." The pieces were falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle designed by a sadist. Brenda wasn't just power-hungry. She was strategically targeting anyone who stood up to her, anyone different, anyone who threatened her iron grip on the neighborhood. By the time the fire burned down to glowing embers and the last neighbor headed home, I'd heard enough horror stories to fill a Stephen King novel. Brenda had been systematically bullying our entire community, one family at a time, counting on people being too isolated and intimidated to compare notes, but tonight had changed that. As I watched Emma help clean up paper plates, chattering excitedly about all the new friends she'd made, I realized Brenda had made a crucial tactical error. She'd united her enemies. The community barbecue had been a Thursday night. By Friday morning, Brenda was clearly feeling threatened by all the neighborly bonding happening in her kingdom. I was barely halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone rang. "Mr. Brennan, this is Officer Martinez with the Sheriff's Department. We received a complaint that you threatened a neighbor during an altercation yesterday." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. "I'm sorry, what?" "Ma'am claims you made verbal threats during a recorded conversation and that she feels unsafe in her own neighborhood." I actually laughed, not the response Officer Martinez was probably expecting. "Sir, would you like to see the actual recording of that conversation? Because I've got the whole thing." 20 minutes later, Martinez was sitting in my living room watching security footage on my laptop. His expression went from professional skepticism to barely contained amusement as he watched Brenda's Saturday morning meltdown in all its high-definition glory. "Mr. Brennan," he said, closing the laptop, "this is the 12th false report she's filed this year. We're actually considering charges against her for misuse of emergency services." 12th? She called us about a suspicious gathering last night, too. Claimed your barbecue was actually some kind of anti-HOA conspiracy meeting. Martinez shook his head. "We drove by around 8. Looked like the most dangerous thing happening was Mrs. Olivia's egg rolls running out." After Martinez left, I called my buddy Marcus, the lawyer. Time to get serious about legal options. What he told me made my blood run cold, and my strategic mind start spinning at the same time. "Jake, what you're describing sounds like harassment based on your veteran status and family situation. That's actually a civil rights violation under federal fair housing law. The fact that she's targeting you for being a single guardian to Emma could be discrimination based on familial status." I'd never thought about it that way, but Marcus was right. Brenda wasn't just being a garden variety HOA tyrant. She was systematically targeting people based on characteristics protected by law. "Here's what most people don't know," Marcus continued, his voice taking on that lawyer tone that meant he was about to drop some serious knowledge. "HOA boards can be held personally liable for discriminatory actions. Their homeowner's insurance won't cover civil rights violations, which means they're on the hook personally for damages." That afternoon, I was researching fair housing laws when Emma came running inside, her face flushed with anxiety rather than her usual post-swimming glow. "Uncle Jake, that mean lady was taking pictures of us again." My protective instincts kicked into overdrive. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She was sitting in her car across the street with a big camera, taking pictures while we were playing. It was creepy. I walked outside and sure enough, there were fresh tire tracks in the gravel where someone had parked and clearly spent time watching my property. The thought of Brenda photographing children, my niece, made my hands shake with barely controlled rage. That evening, Tom called with news that made everything crystal clear. "Jake, you need to know what happened at tonight's emergency HOA meeting." "Let me guess. Another attempt to discuss my violations?" "Worse. She's planning to hold a special vote next week on a problem resident assessment. Basically, she wants to charge you $15,000 in legal fees to resolve your non-compliance issues." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. "Can she do that?" "That's the thing. She never actually sent you a meeting notice. The bylaws require 72 hours advance notice to all homeowners for any vote involving assessments. She's literally breaking her own rules." But Tom wasn't done. "I recorded the whole meeting on my phone. She said some things about you that are, well, let's just say they clearly show her real motivations." An hour later, Tom was in my living room, playing audio that would have made a discrimination lawyer salivate like a starving man at a steakhouse. Brenda's voice came through his phone speaker, crystal clear. "This Brennan character represents everything wrong with our community standards. We have an unstable military type who thinks he can just ignore our authority because he has PTSD or whatever. The man is clearly unfit to supervise children, and his little camping trips with all those kids are frankly inappropriate." The recording got worse. She'd actually suggested that my custody arrangement with Emma was suspicious, and that single men shouldn't be allowed to have children staying overnight without proper supervision. Tom's face was grim as he turned off the recording. Jake, I've been on this board for 3 years, and I've never heard anything this bad. She's not just targeting your property. She's attacking your character and your family relationships. As I listened to Brenda's venomous words echoing in my memory, something cold and determined settled in my chest. She'd crossed the line from property disputes into personal destruction. But what she didn't realize was that in attacking my fitness as Emma's guardian, she'd just given me enough ammunition for a civil rights lawsuit that could end her HOA career permanently. I looked out my window at the lake, where Emma's water toys were scattered on the dock like colorful promises of tomorrow's fun, and made a decision. Time to stop playing defense. That weekend, I was sitting in Marcus's law office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and feeling like I was preparing for the most important battle of my life. The smell of old leather law books mixed with fresh coffee created an atmosphere that felt both scholarly and slightly intimidating. Jake, I've been digging into your property records, Marcus said, his voice carrying that tone lawyers get when they've discovered something big. You need to see this. He spread out a collection of documents across his mahogany desk like he was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Original deeds, survey maps, county records dating back to the 1980s. Your grandfather's friend who sold him this property in 1987. He was smart, really smart. Marcus pointed to a section of the original deed that was highlighted in yellow. See this clause here? Riparian rights extending 200 feet into the waterway, including exclusive use and access control. I stared at the document, trying to process what I was reading. What exactly does that mean in normal people terms? Marcus leaned back in his chair with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. It means you don't just own lakefront property, Jake. You own the lake itself. The entire swimming and boating area that Brenda's been protecting like some kind of aquatic dictator, that's yours. Every square foot of it. The room suddenly felt like it was spinning. You're telling me that every time someone goes swimming or fishing, they're technically on my property? Not technically. Literally. When properties include riparian rights, the owner controls water access, recreational use, fishing rights, everything. And here's the beautiful part. Those rights were never transferred to the HOA. They couldn't be, because the HOA didn't exist when your grandfather bought the property. I looked out Marcus's office window at the parking lot, but my mind was seeing my lake with completely different eyes. So all these years, when Brenda's been telling people they can or can't use the lake, she's been giving permission she never had the authority to give. Every boat launch, every swimming session, every fishing trip has been happening at your discretion, even if you didn't know it. Marcus pulled out another document, this one from the county assessor's office. I did some research on similar properties in Missouri. Waterfront land with full riparian rights typically sells for 40 to 60% more than regular lakefront. Your grandfather's friend essentially gave him a gift worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The magnitude of this discovery was staggering. So, legally, I could ban everyone from the lake tomorrow if I wanted to? Absolutely. You could put up no trespassing signs in the water itself and have every boat towed. The sheriff's department would have to enforce it because it's your private property. But even as Marcus explained the nuclear option, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, this was about justice. For 3 years, Brenda had terrorized our community by wielding fake authority like a weapon. Now I had real authority, backed by legal documents and county records. Marcus, what happens to property values if the lake access disappears? His expression grew serious. Conservative estimate, 30 to 40% drop. Most people bought in Pine Ridge specifically for lake access. Without it, you're talking about inland homes with a water view. I thought about all my neighbors, the Johnsons with their morning jogs around the water, the Kowalskis teaching their grandkids to fish, Mrs. Olivia's husband who restored that beautiful old sailboat. None of them deserved to suffer for Brenda's tyranny. There's got to be a middle ground here, I said. Something that stops Brenda without punishing innocent people. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's why you're going to win this, Jake. You're thinking like a leader, not a dictator. Looking at those legal documents spread across the desk, I realized Brenda had spent 3 years trying to control something that was never hers to control in the first place. Time to remind everyone what real authority looked like. Walking out of Marcus's office that afternoon, I felt like a general who'd just discovered the enemy had been fighting with water pistols while I'd been sitting on an entire arsenal. But unlike Brenda, I wasn't going to abuse this power. I was going to use it strategically to fix our community for good. First stop, recruiting my intelligence network. Tom had become my unofficial eyes and ears on the HOA board, and when I called him with the riparian rights news, the silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. Jake, are you telling me you literally own the lake? 200 feet of it, according to county records going back to 1987. Another long pause. Holy shit! Sorry language, but holy shit! Tom, I need you to do something for me. Can you get me a list of every family Brenda's harassed over the past 3 years? And I mean everyone, not just HOA violations, but county complaints, police calls, the works. Give me 48 hours. My wife works at the county clerk's office, and she's been quietly keeping track of Brenda's complaint spree. She calls it her crazy file. Next, I reached out to Rodriguez at the county zoning office. Turns out, having a federal case for civil rights violations gets bureaucrats very interested in helping you document patterns of abuse. Rodriguez had been dealing with Brenda's harassment for so long that he practically had a PhD in her psychological warfare tactics. Mr. Brennan, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to finally challenge this woman legally, he said over coffee at the local diner. The vinyl booth squeaked under his weight as he leaned forward conspiratorially. She's filed complaints against 67 different properties. 67, most of them veterans, single parents, or anyone who doesn't fit her country club fantasy. Rodriguez pulled out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Environmental violations, structural safety complaints, noise ordinances, she's used every bureaucratic weapon in the book. And here's the kicker. 83% of her complaints were completely frivolous. We've wasted thousands of taxpayer hours investigating her personal vendettas. The local newspaper editor, a Vietnam vet named Bill Crawford, was my next ally. When I explained the civil rights angle and the riparian rights discovery, his eyes lit up like he'd just found the holy grail of small-town corruption stories. Jake, this is bigger than just HOA drama, Bill said, leaning back in his cluttered office chair surrounded by decades of local journalism awards. This is about protecting communities from petty tyrants who abuse positions of trust. Mind if I start working on a background piece? Nothing published until you give the green light, but I want to be ready. The smell of old newspapers and coffee grounds in Bill's office reminded me of my grandfather's workshop, that mixture of experience and purpose that comes from years of doing important work. Marcus, meanwhile, was building our legal strategy like he was planning D-Day. 3 different approaches, each designed to give Brenda a way out while protecting our community from future abuse. First option, he explained over Chinese takeout in his office that evening, we file the civil rights complaint and let the federal investigation run its course. That's the nuclear option. If she's found guilty of systematic discrimination, she could face serious legal consequences. Second option, we use the riparian rights as leverage. You offer a permanent easement to all residents, essentially giving them legal lake access forever, in exchange for comprehensive HOA reform and Brenda's resignation. Third option is the community meeting approach. You present the evidence publicly, let social pressure do the work, and offer compromise solutions that benefit everyone except the people who've been abusing their authority. I'd been leaning toward option 3. After 20 years in the military, I'd learned that winning battles was less important than winning wars, and wars were won by building alliances, not just defeating enemies. What most people don't understand about legal leverage, Marcus continued, chopsticks pausing halfway to his mouth, is that the most powerful weapon is often the one you never have to use. Once Brenda realizes you can legally shut down lake access for the entire community, she'll understand that her reign of terror is over. That weekend, I organized what I carefully called a community lake safety meeting. Innocent enough to avoid Brenda's suspicion, but comprehensive enough to address our real issues. I sent invitations to every household, including a polite note that we'd be discussing recent safety concerns and community access policies. The response was overwhelming. 89 families RSVP'd yes out of 127 total households. Even families I'd never spoken to were planning to attend, apparently tired of Brenda's management style but never knowing how to address it. Sunday evening, as Emma helped me set up folding chairs in our backyard for a practice run, she asked the question that crystallized everything for me. Uncle Jake, after the meeting, will the mean lady stop being mean to everyone? Looking at her hopeful face, illuminated by the golden sunset reflecting off our lake, I realized this wasn't just about property rights or legal victories. This was about creating a community where kids like Emma could grow up without fear, where neighbors supported each other instead of tearing each other down. Yes, sweetheart, I said. After this meeting, things are going to be very different around here. Monday morning arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes even the lake feel like a warm bath. I was helping Emma and her friends set up a slip and slide on the lawn when my phone started buzzing with frantic messages from neighbors. Jake, Brenda's going door to door telling people your meeting is illegal, Mrs. Olivia. She's claiming you're planning to ban all kids from the lake area, Tom. Just saw her at the grocery store spreading rumors about your military record, the Johnsons. Brenda had clearly gotten wind of my community meeting and was in full panic mode. But instead of backing down gracefully, she was doubling down on the crazy like a gambler betting their house on a losing hand. By Tuesday, the gossip network was working overtime. Apparently, Brenda had printed flyers, actual flyers, claiming I was an unstable veteran with anger management issues, who posed a clear and present danger to community safety. She was leaving them on car windshields like some kind of deranged political campaign. Wednesday brought the health department inspector to my door. A tired-looking woman named Patricia, who clearly had better things to do than chase another one of Brenda's phantom complaints. Mr. Brennan, we received a report that your septic system is contaminating the lake and creating a public health hazard. I almost felt sorry for Patricia. She obviously knew this was bullshit before she even got out of her car. Ma'am, my system was inspected and certified just 8 months ago. Would you like to see the documentation? 20 minutes later, Patricia was shaking her head as she climbed back into her county vehicle. Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you. This is the 4th false septic complaint Mrs. Whitmore has filed this year against different residents. We're considering referring her for criminal charges under the false reporting statute. The smell of Patricia's diesel truck exhaust mixed with the sweet scent of honeysuckle growing along my fence line as I watched her drive away. Another of Brenda's desperate attacks had backfired spectacularly. Thursday evening, Tom called with intelligence that made my blood pressure spike into the danger zone. Jake, she scheduled a competing emergency HOA meeting for the same night as your community gathering. She's trying to split the attendance. Can she do that legally? Technically, yes, but here's the problem. She's only notified her core supporters. The rest of us found out through the neighborhood gossip chain. That's a clear violation of the meeting notification requirements in our bylaws. But Tom wasn't finished delivering bad news. There's more. She applied for a $15,000 emergency legal fund from the HOA budget. Claims she needs it to protect the community from frivolous lawsuits and harassment. I sat down hard on my deck chair, watching Emma and her friends chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The sound of their laughter mixed with the gentle lapping of water against my dock should have been peaceful, but Brenda was poisoning even that simple joy. What lawsuit is she talking about? That's just it. There is no lawsuit. Yet. But Marcus told me something interesting when I ran into him at the hardware store. Apparently, filing for legal funds to fight imaginary lawsuits while targeting specific residents could be considered misuse of HOA resources. Friday morning brought the nuclear escalation I'd been dreading. My phone rang at 7 a.m., and the caller ID made my stomach drop like a stone in deep water. Mr. Brennan, this is Sarah Mitchell from Child Protective Services. We've received a report of potential child endangerment at your residence. The world seemed to stop spinning. Through my kitchen window, I could see Emma on the dock with her friends feeding bread to the ducks like she had every morning for the past 3 weeks. The most innocent, wholesome scene imaginable, and Brenda had somehow twisted it into something sinister. Ma'am, can you tell me the specific nature of the complaint? The report claims you're exposing children to dangerous water conditions without proper supervision, and questions whether a single male should have unsupervised overnight access to multiple minor children. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. Brenda hadn't just attacked my property or my community standing. She'd attacked my relationship with Emma, the most precious thing in my life. 2 hours later, Ms. Mitchell was sitting in my living room, looking around at Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, the safety equipment neatly stored by the door, and the obvious signs of a home where children were loved and protected. Mr. Brennan, I have to ask, do you have any idea who might have filed this complaint? I showed her 3 years' worth of documentation. The harassment timeline, the false police reports, the escalating pattern of targeting my family relationships. Ms. Mitchell's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. In 15 years of social work, I've rarely seen such a clear case of malicious reporting, she said, closing my file folder. Filing false reports to CPS isn't just unethical, it's a Class A misdemeanor in Missouri. I'll be referring this to the prosecutor's office. As I watched her car disappear down my driveway, Emma skipped up the path with wet hair and a huge smile. "Uncle Jake, why did that nice lady want to see our house?" "Just some grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But looking at Emma's trusting face, I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Brenda had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The CPS investigation wrapped up in 48 hours, the fastest closure Ms. Mitchell said she'd seen in her career, but the damage Brenda intended went far beyond the official paperwork. Word spread through Pine Ridge Estates like wildfire in August, and I could feel the shift in how some neighbors looked at me. Saturday morning, I was loading groceries into my truck when I overheard two women whispering near the pharmacy entrance. "I heard he's got all those children over there unsupervised," one said. "Makes you wonder what's really going on." The taste of bile rose in my throat. Brenda's poison was working exactly as she'd planned. But then something unexpected happened. Tom's wife, Linda, appeared beside the gossiping women like an avenging angel in yoga pants. "Excuse me," Linda said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 3 teenagers. "But Jake Brennan is one of the most devoted guardians I've ever seen. Maybe instead of spreading rumors, you should ask why someone would file a false report against a veteran taking care of his deployed brother's daughter." The women scattered like startled pigeons. Linda caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up that made me believe in humanity again. That afternoon, Marcus called with news that sent chills down my spine and fire through my veins simultaneously. "Jake, I just got off the phone with the prosecutor's office. They're moving forward with charges against Brenda for filing the false CPS report. Class A misdemeanor, up to a year in jail and a $5,000 fine." "Good," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "But here's the thing. Word is getting out about the charges. Her supporters are starting to panic. Tom heard through the grapevine that she's planning something desperate for tonight's competing HOA meeting." "What kind of desperate?" "The kind where drowning people grab whatever they can reach, even if it's an anchor." That evening, while I was grilling burgers for Emma and her friends, my security cameras picked up something that made my blood run cold. Brenda's car, parked across the street at 11 p.m., with her sitting inside taking photographs with a telephoto lens. Not of my property. Of the children. I called the sheriff's department immediately. Deputy Martinez arrived within 10 minutes, his squad car's headlights illuminating Brenda's vehicle like a spotlight on a stage. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle," I heard him say through my open window. The next morning, Tom called with a full report of Brenda's emergency HOA meeting. His voice was a mixture of shock and dark satisfaction. "Jake, it was a complete disaster. Only 8 people showed up, her sister, mother-in-law, and 6 neighbors who clearly came just to watch the train wreck." "What did she say?" "She spent 20 minutes ranting about how you're weaponizing the legal system and trying to destroy the community. Then she announced that the board was voting to impose a special assessment on your property, specifically $25,000 for legal defense and community protection." I nearly choked on my coffee. Can she even do that? That's where it gets beautiful. Mrs. Patterson, the retired school principal who lives on Elm Street, stood up and asked to see the legal authority for targeting a single homeowner with punitive assessments. Tom's voice was practically gleeful now. "Brenda couldn't produce any documentation because, surprise, there isn't any. You can't just make up fees to punish people you don't like." Mrs. Patterson actually brought a copy of the HOA bylaws and read them out loud. What happened then? Complete meltdown. Brenda started screaming about traitors and conspiracy and how everyone was corrupted by your military propaganda. Her own sister told her to sit down and calm herself. The meeting had apparently ended with the 6 neutral attendees walking out in disgust, and Brenda's core supporters having a whispered argument in the parking lot about whether she needed professional help. Sunday brought the news I'd been both expecting and dreading. Marcus called while I was helping Emma pack for her return home. Her 6-week stay was ending, and my brother would be picking her up in a few days. "Jake, Brenda's lawyer filed for an emergency restraining order against you. Claims you're stalking and harassing her, and that your security cameras constitute illegal surveillance of her activities." I looked out at Emma, who was carefully arranging her collection of lake rocks in a shoebox to take home, and felt something protective and primal surge through me. "Marcus, I'm done playing games. I figured you might be. I've got all the paperwork ready for your civil rights complaint, the HOA financial audit request, and the riparian rights enforcement notice. We can file everything Monday morning and serve papers by Tuesday. And the community meeting? Still on for Saturday night. But Jake, after everything that's happened this week, you're going to have an audience that's absolutely ready to hear the truth. Standing on my deck that evening, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and orange while Emma and her friends enjoyed their last evening of summer freedom, I realized that Brenda had unknowingly engineered her own downfall. By attacking my family, she'd shown the entire community exactly who she really was. Now it was time to show them who I really was. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of perfect summer weather that makes you remember why you love living near water. The community center looked like a small-town political rally, with cars parked 3 blocks away and people streaming toward the building carrying folding chairs and notebooks like they were preparing for the most important town hall of their lives. I'd arrived early with Marcus, both of us carrying banker's boxes full of evidence that represented 3 years of systematic harassment and abuse of power. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with nervous energy filled the room as neighbors filed in, many of whom I'd never seen at any community gathering before. Deputy Martinez was stationed near the back, officially there for crowd control, but really there because everyone knew this was going to be explosive. Bill Crawford from the newspaper sat in the front row with his photographer, camera ready to document what would either be justice served or a complete community meltdown. By 7 p.m., the room was packed beyond capacity. 89 families had confirmed attendance, but looking around, it seemed like half the county had shown up. Even people from neighboring communities had come to watch the HOA showdown that had become local legend. Then Brenda arrived. She walked in like she owned the place, wearing a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, flanked by her sister and mother-in-law like some kind of suburban entourage. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as conversations died and heads turned. I stood up, my military training keeping my voice calm and authoritative despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know many of you have concerns about recent events in our community, and I think it's time we addressed them openly and honestly. I clicked on the overhead projector Marcus had set up, displaying the original 1987 property deed in crisp black and white for everyone to see. First, I want everyone to understand something that might come as a surprise. This lake that we all love, that brings our community together, legally speaking, I own it. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. According to Missouri property law and the original deed filed 37 years ago, my grandfather purchased not just lakefront property, but riparian rights extending 200 feet into the water. Every swim, every boat launch, every fishing trip for the past 20 years has been happening on my private property. Audible gasps echoed through the room. In the third row, I saw Mrs. Olivia's hand fly to her mouth. Tom was shaking his head in amazement. But it was Brenda's reaction that told the whole story. Her face had gone from confident smirk to paper-white shock in about 3 seconds flat. Now, I'm not telling you this to threaten anyone, I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. I'm telling you this because for 3 years, someone has been wielding fake authority to terrorize our neighbors, and it's time that stopped. That's when I played the recording. Tom's audio from the emergency HOA meeting filled the room through portable speakers, Brenda's voice crystal clear as she called me an unstable military type, and questioned my fitness to care for children. The collective intake of breath from 90 families was like a windstorm rolling across the water. Brenda shot to her feet like she'd been stung by a hornet. This is entrapment. You can't record private meetings without consent. Actually, Marcus said, standing up with a stack of legal documents, HOA meetings are considered public forums under Missouri law when they involve community business. But more importantly, Mrs. Whitmore, this recording clearly demonstrates a pattern of harassment based on veteran status and family composition, which constitutes civil rights violations under federal law. The crowd was starting to murmur now, pieces clicking into place as neighbors realized the scope of what had been happening. Let me be clear about what's been going on here, I said, clicking to the next slide showing a timeline of harassment incidents. 47 frivolous complaints to county offices, 12 false police reports, 3 attempts to weaponize Child Protective Services against my family, and last week, stalking and photographing children from a public street. Each revelation hit the crowd like physical blows. I could see Brenda's remaining supporters physically recoiling from her. Now, I said, moving to the final slide. Here are your options as a community. Option 1. I exercise my full legal rights and ban all lake access immediately. Property values drop 40% overnight, and Pine Ridge Estates becomes just another subdivision with a nice view. The crowd shifted nervously. This was their worst nightmare scenario. Option 2. I grant permanent lake access easements to every family here tonight, ensuring that your children and grandchildren can enjoy this water forever. In exchange, we reform HOA leadership and implement accountability measures that prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again. Before I could continue, Mrs. Patterson stood up in the middle of the room. I move that we accept option 2 and request Mrs. Whitmore's immediate resignation from all HOA positions. Seconded, came from at least 6 different voices simultaneously. Brenda was frantically looking around the room for support that simply wasn't there. Even her sister was staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "This is fraud," Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "He's blackmailing the entire community." That's when Deputy Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of filing false reports and harassment. You need to come with me." The room erupted as 90 families watched 3 years of tyranny finally come to an end. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut on Brenda Whitmore's wrists was the most beautiful music I'd heard in 3 years. As Deputy Martinez led her out of the community center, 90 families erupted in applause that could probably be heard 3 counties over. But the real magic happened in the weeks that followed. Within 72 hours, I'd signed permanent lake easements for every family in Pine Ridge Estates, except for the 3 households that had actively supported Brenda's harassment campaign. They could reapply after demonstrating good neighbor behavior for a full year. The new HOA board, elected unanimously that very night, implemented term limits, transparency requirements, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Tom became the new president, and his first official act was organizing the largest community barbecue in neighborhood history. The smell of grilled corn and the sound of children's laughter echoing across the water felt like our community exhaling after holding its breath for years. Brenda's legal troubles multiplied faster than rabbits in springtime. The Class A misdemeanor for false CPS reporting was just the appetizer. Marcus's civil rights complaint triggered a federal investigation that uncovered systematic targeting of veterans, single parents, and anyone who didn't fit her suburban fantasy. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover civil rights violations, leaving her personally liable for damages. The lawsuit settlement, which I can't discuss in detail thanks to non-disclosure agreements, let's just say it was enough to establish the Pine Ridge Veterans Scholarship Fund and still have money left over for a community playground and annual lake conservation program. 6 months later, Brenda quietly moved out of Pine Ridge, selling her McMansion at a significant loss. Word through the gossip network was that no HOA within 50 miles would accept her as a board member after her background check revealed federal civil rights violations. Turns out, being a documented bully isn't a great resume enhancer. The transformation of our community was remarkable. Property values increased 15% within the first year, but more importantly, neighbors started acting like neighbors again. Kids played freely without fear of harassment. Veterans found respect instead of suspicion. Families felt safe being themselves. Emma's next summer visit was completely different. Instead of 3 nervous friends, she brought 7 kids from her school who'd heard about our amazing lake house. Watching her teach newcomers how to skip stones and spot blue herons, I realized this was what community was supposed to feel like. My brother came home from deployment that fall and loved the neighborhood so much he bought a house 2 streets over. "Jake," he said, watching Emma and her cousin race kayaks while their parents cheered from the shore, "this is exactly the kind of place where kids should grow up." The annual Lake Day Festival we started now draws visitors from 3 counties. Local businesses sponsor booths, kids compete in swimming contests, and adults actually enjoy HOA meetings because they focus on community improvement instead of petty tyranny. Last year's festival raised $12,000 for local military families through the Scholarship Fund. But the most satisfying moment came 2 years later when a young Army sergeant and his wife moved into Brenda's old house. As I helped them unload their moving truck, he mentioned he'd been worried about HOA restrictions on military families. "Not here," I told him, watching his kids discover the tire swing Tom had hung from the old oak tree. "Here, We take care of each other. Here's what I learned from this whole experience. Bullies thrive in darkness and isolation. They count on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. But when good people work together with solid evidence and legal backing, even the most entrenched tyrant becomes just another angry person shouting at the wind. Know your property rights. Seriously, check your deed for things like riparian rights or easements you didn't know existed. Understand your state's recording laws because documenting harassment is your best defense. And remember, HOA boards can be held personally liable for discriminatory actions, so they need to follow the law just like everyone else. Most importantly, never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in your own community. Whether it's an HOA Karen or any other kind of bully, you have rights, and there are people who will help you defend them. What's your worst HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments. Let's help each other recognize the red flags and fight back against neighborhood tyrants. And if you want to see more stories about ordinary people defeating corrupt systems, hit that subscribe button and tell me what state you're watching from. Because at the end of the day, home isn't just where you live, it's where you're free to be yourself without fear.